Hello all you fine beautiful people, I'm back here once again with another video, and today I am going to be looking at the whole Scott Lade, Prog Corner, and Andy Edwards beef, if you can really call it that, quasi beef that's going on here. So I'm gonna say right off the bat, have huge respect for both creators. Scott Lade, learned so much from him, learned so much about Prog from Scott, but I also really love Andy Edwards' channel. Learned so much about jazz fusion, jazz rock, all of that from him, and he does it in a way that really made me step back and say, hey, I really want to discover this, and has really left an impression on me for just music. And I think both guys, at the end of the day, love music. Now, I've seen so many thumbnails and stuff come up about Team Scott coming up. I'm going to hold off on doing any of that stuff because, quite honestly, and this is where the crux of my argument comes from. In the original video, which to a lot of people who've seen a lot of the back and forth, the original point was all made off of Andy Edwards doing a video, is Neil Peart overrated? And Scott believes so heavily he isn't. Andy Edwards believes he is. Now, I kind of will say this, and I know Scott, I don't think he'd want me to change just to fit in with a certain group or whatever. But at the end of the day, my original point was as well, and I said in that video that Scott did, that when Andy Edwards did the reaction to, I maybe just because I wouldn't have made a great video or part of his video, but I did agree with him. And at the end of the day, I do agree with Andy Edwards that Neil Peart is overrated. Now, I think also in that same video, and I was looking at the comment sections to not only Scott's but also Andy's, is I think there is a bigger question that could be had out of this whole thing, talking about tribalism in music. Well, not only in music, but also on YouTube. Like, this is something that is very much an internet phenomenon, is you always go and look at top 10 lists, and as soon as you go look at them, you'll always see the same person saying, oh, I don't agree, this person's list sucks. And there's something that I always find very fascinating going looking at these lists, is how many people take them seriously. Like, the reason why in this that I agree with Andy is because, quite honestly, at the end of the day, I do believe Neil Peart's overrated, and I gave a whole list of drummers as well that I thought were better. Some of them were on Andy's list as well, some of them not. But looking at this thing and seeing how people take the whole idea of somebody saying somebody's overrated, is it feels like, for a lot of people, and it's from being on the internet for a long time, a lot of people, it's either 100% or you're dead to me. And they're not willing to physically hear the conversations being had. Because anyone who watched any of these videos all the way through knows what the whole thing's about. It really is. And I've looked at a lot of interesting people talk about interesting topics, and I find Andy Edwards very interesting because I believe there is a philosophical nature to what Andy Edwards is talking about, and he's also very humorous. It's English, it's very dry, but I do like it. And the more and more Andy goes on explaining his points, the more I see where he's coming from. But as I said about people hearing the other side of the argument, I love also listening to people I don't agree with, because it gives me that dichotomy of a whole different side of an argument. It can't just be one side of an argument, because otherwise then you're in this massive echo chamber of just people agreeing with each other. And I think it is a very bigger issue to talk about, and it's been on the internet. Like, I've been on the internet since pretty much 2005, 2006, like, just through I've lived through the YouTube, Facebook, MySpace, Jesus, there's so many Twitter, all this other stuff going on. I've lived through it all. So it really is a lot of, I've seen a lot of this. And the one thing that I really found interesting is how many people are either team this, or I agree with this person, I don't agree with this person is this person's that. I don't get into that because I think it's pointless. At the end of the day, you're only as good as your argument and how well you can articulate your argument. And hearing Andy talk about why he thinks Neil's overrated, I see it. Like, nowhere in Andy's video, when he said Neil Peart is overrated, did he say that Neil Peart was not a great drummer. He wasn't a phenomenal drummer, that he wasn't like one of Andy's favorite drummers. And that's kind of the point, I think, in some of this that got lost, is there is this kind of feeling of either have to be one or the other. And it also goes back to a whole thing of all these old school prog heads. And I've seen a lot of people my age or younger talk about prog, and they were kind of brought to prog from their parents. So with their parents, they also brought in their own biases, their own feelings towards things. And especially also being Canadian as well, the whole thing of Rush kind of feeling like part of the family a lot. And the problem I've always had with that whole Rush part of the family thing is it kind of becomes like an indoctrination into certain bands. I feel the same way about people who brought their kids into Yes, is I kind of feel that same way of thinking. Now, I'm not going to say I agree with absolutely everything Andy Edwards has ever said. I don't. And I think that's the great thing about a lot of these arguments is you can agree to disagree. For example, my favorite all-time band is Pink Floyd. Andy Edwards did a video where he said Pink Floyd's the most overrated band of all time. Now, I didn't get mad or angry about it. I listened to the points Andy Edwards articulated, and I seen exactly where he's coming from. I'm like, you know what? I can see it. It depends where you come from. Now, I'm not a huge musical person. Like, I couldn't break down technique, chords, song structure, timbre, all this stuff people use. I'm pretty much more of just a sonic listener. Does it sound good to me? That's virtually, at the end of the day, what I listen to. And some of it I can pick out what's going on. Some of it I really will say, you know what, that is phenomenal. That's great. I love that. Do more of that. There is stuff out there, surprisingly, actually, I don't like, but I tend to really come into everything with an open mind, open ears, listen to it. Is there stuff I think, quite honestly, I might be one of the few in the minority? One of my probably more controversial opinions, I think Tool is as dry as paint. Like, listening to Tool is like listening to paint dry. I think they're a band that's accentuated by a very damn good bass player and a good drummer, but the rest of the band I find absolutely boring and brings nothing. But that's where I'm like, hey, it's just me. I know people who absolutely love Tool, love everything about them. I just don't. But anyway, I thought I'd come a little bit on this. I'm not going to choose a side, Andy or Scott. I'll say with my original point that I do agree with Andy. I think that's the point that is kind of getting lost in a lot of this, is where people love coming out here and saying this and that. I think there is a bigger argument to be had, and I think a very silly argument. I think the one thing Scott and Andy have brought out of this is actually how silly these top 10 and getting mad about them debates are. It really is. It's comedy watching these guys do this and getting so worked up about it. Like, I remember Scott posted a photo to Facebook, and I'm like, so how long until we see Scott and Andy in the sandbox having a cat fight with one another over who ripped whose comic book? That's kind of the way I see it. But anyway, that's my thoughts and opinions. I probably rambled on way too long, probably lost half of you halfway through. But once again, thank you guys so much for watching. Tell me what you think of this whole thing. Is this is pretty much silly as I think it is, but anyway, comment down below. This is me here signing out. Peace.